Bava Metzia Daf Lamed continues learning our most recent Mishnah, and then towards the end of the Daf gets to our next Mishnah. So let's learn it line by line. The Gemara discusses the line in the Mishnah that said that if you're taking care of a lost object which you have found, if it's clothing, you can spread it out, and you should spread it out only for its own sake and not for your covet. Someone asks, what if you have both things in mind? What if you're spreading it out because it needs to be spread out, and you also tend to get something out of spreading it out as well? So the Gemara first wants to prove from the Mishnah. Then the Gemara says you can't prove from our Mishnah because it has contradicting diukim. The Mishnah says that you are allowed to spread it out for its own sake. That implies for its and yours is not. On the other hand, it says that what's usher is for your sake. That implies that if it's for both your sake and its sake, that will be okay. So it's a contradictory mashmais, therefore you can't prove anything from that. So the Gemara says, so let's try bringing proof from a different brisa. Brisa says as follows: you should not spread a article of clothing out on the bed or on a peg for your purposes, but you are allowed to spread it out for its own benefit. Then it says that if you have guests that are in your house, then you shouldn't spread it on the bed or on the peg, neither for its purposes nor for your purposes. So you see clearly the Gemara understands that when the guests will see it, you'll get honor from that. And therefore, even if you're spreading it ostensibly for the purpose of helping the garment, but because you'll get honor from the guests, you shouldn't. So you see that if it's for its purpose and for your, then you should not do it. So the Gemara says, no, this case is different, because when the guests are there and they look at it, it creates actual destruction to the object. You could say either because of ayin hara, people will see this fancy garment and they'll become jealous and cast an ayin hara, which will cause it to be destroyed, or they may actually come and steal it, now that they know that you have it. Okay, the Gemara brings another right from the halacha of an egla rufa. Egla rufa is a sheep that needs to be set aside, or a goat that has to be set aside and cannot be worked at all. If it gets worked, then that's a psul. So the Mishnah there says if you put it in a yoke together with other sheep, it's kosher, it's not a psul, as long as you didn't have in mind that it should thresh. If it threshed and you didn't intend for it to thresh, that's still fine because you didn't intend for it to thresh. Now, if you put it in the yoke with intent that it should nurse from its mother who's also in the yoke, and at the same time should thresh, then that's a problem, and that's puzzle. So you see here that if it's for its own purpose to nurse and for your purpose to thresh, it's still a psul. So the same thing should apply to us if you're spreading out the clothing for its benefit to air it out and for your benefit to be miskabed and by it should be usher as well. So no, it's not a proof over there. It's different because it's discussing egla rufa. The Torah there says ashali ubadba, that was not worked. It's exeris akasav, that you should not do anything with it. Says Gemara, if that's true, then even in the first case, where you just brought it in without any intent to get anything from it, and it was threshing on its own, and you did not intend for that at all, that should be a problem as well, because you have exeris kasav ashali ubadba. So Gemara says, no, we have a drasha, we have a Mishnah that spells out that if a bird lands on it, or a zachar climbs on it to be roveya, this is referring to a paraduma, it's the same malacha that it can't be worked, then it is puzzle. But in other circumstances it's not. And over there, Rav Papa explains, the Torah says ubad, and it is spelled avad. Ubad means that it happened by itself. Avad means that you worked it, and therefore we need a combination of the two. You should be aware of and happy about the work that happened. If you didn't want it at all, then it doesn't count and it doesn't puzzle it. Okay, the next line in the Mishnah said that if you find silver or wood kalim, you can use them for its own benefit, but again, not to the point at which you start to rub them out. Or go to Brisa. Brisa says somebody who finds wood kalim can use it in order that it shouldn't rot. If he finds copper, he should use it in hot water, but not directly on the fire, because that'll cause it to rub out. If he finds silver, he should use it in cold water, but not in hot, because that'll cause it to blacken. If he finds spades that people use to clean the ashes out of the fireplace, or if he finds axes, he could use them gently in gentle things. He should not use it hard. Shouldn't go hard with them because that'll cause him to get holes. If he finds gold and glass, he shouldn't touch them at all until the Navi comes. And just like they said by an Aveda, by a lost object, they say the same thing by a Pikadin, that you're watching for someone else. You might ask, why are you touching a Pikadin? If the guy gave it to you, you're not supposed to do anything with it at all. You're just supposed to hold on to it until he returns. Where it says, we're talking about where he went away for a long time. He went overseas, and it's been a while, and therefore you need to take care of it, because otherwise it'll be destroyed by the time he returns. Okay, the Gemara now refers to the last line in the Mishnah, which starts under Sugyo. Last line in the Mishnah said that if the finder is an elderly individual, or he's someone that it's not in keeping with his dignity to pick up this lost object and return it. So if it's a sack or if it's a box, you have a chashuv individual to be seen schlepping a sack or a box on the street is not something he would do even for his own things, so then he does not have to return it. So the Gemara wants to know what's the source. The Gemara says, if you look at the pasuk describing the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, it says v'hisalamta, it says, and you should ignore it. Now the pasuk is referring to the opposite. The pasuk is saying, do not see your friend's ox or his sheep lost, and you should ignore it, meaning it's saying you should not ignore it. Instead, return it. But the fact that it phrases it in that way, you should ignore it, seems to indicate that there are certain circumstances in which you should ignore it. So the Gemara therefore says, for example, that would be if the lost object was in a cemetery and the person who spots it is a kohen. It's an iser daraisa, an iser lav, and an iser asay for him to go into the cemetery. Or if he's an elderly person and it's not within his dignity, or the person who's finding it will lose more money by taking the time to pick it up and return it than he will save for the loser, than the object is worth. And then he's going to charge him for it. He's going to end up just costing him more in the long run. So if your time is that valuable, or this object is so invaluable, don't pick it up and return it. Now, it says the Gemara, which of these do we need a pasuk for? Some of these sound like they're obvious. Which one do we need the pasuk for? So if it's for the kohen in the cemetery, so obviously you don't need a pasuk for that. Returning lost object is a mitzvah asay. Kohen being metami is iser asay and lois asay. And asay cannot possibly take precedence over a lois asay and an asay together, and therefore I would never dream that he should actually return it. In addition, halachos of Isura always push off halachos of Memoina. Things which are permitted or not permitted to do. Halacha always push away monetary obligations. So the Gemara says, okay, so maybe it's for the other halacha where your time is worth more than the object is worth. So the Gemara says we could derive that from what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, because Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav. The Torah says, "Efes lo yiyeh b'cha evyoin," that just there should not be any poor people among you. The Torah is saying, don't do mitzvahs to the extent that it's going to make you be poor. We don't want to increase poverty amongst Klal Yisrael. So don't return a lost object if it's going to make you lose too much money in the deal. Says the Gemara, then we must conclude that the pasuk is needed for the case of a zaken ve'en lefi k'fayda, somebody who is elderly and it is not within his dignity to return a lost object. And the Gemara doesn't argue on that. And the Gemara says that Rabbah says that if, however, he starts to move it, let's say it's an animal, and he hits it, and it starts to walk, then he's started to return it, now he's chayiv in it, even though it's ein lefi k'vayde. Gemara quotes an incident. The Abai was sitting in front of Rabbah, and he saw a goat, a lost animal that was hanging around over there. Abai picked up a clod of earth and threw it at it, and it moved, and Rabbah said, now you're chayiv to return it. Ordinarily, it would have been ein lefi k'vayde, but you do have to return it. Now the Gemara asks, what if he's the type of individual and he doesn't mind dealing with an object like this out in the fields where no one's really going to see him, but at home, inside the city, his neighbors will see, there he would be embarrassed to do it. So, and then he finds an object out in the field. So do you say, well, he'll never be able to return it because he's going to have to bring it into the city and there he's not chayiv, so therefore he's not chayiv to return it at all? Or do we say the opposite? Since he found it out in the fields and there he becomes chayiv, so once he's chayiv, he stays chayiv and he has to actually return it in the city as well. Gemara leaves that as a teku question is unresolved. Now, Rava says a rule, anything that you would do if it was your own, you have to return if it's your friend's. Anything that similar concept applies to the mitzvah of Prika Uteina. Prika Uteina is the mitzvah to help someone load or unload his animal. So if somebody's traveling and his donkey is overloaded, you should help him unload. And if he's struggling to load up the donkey, you should help him load. But that also, there's a patur if it's not lefi k'vayde. But if you do it yourself, then you should do it for your friend as well. Gemara now brings a related incident that happened with Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yosi. He was walking along the way and he met someone who was carrying a bundle of wood. And he stopped to rearrange the wood on him, so he was struggling with the load. And he asked Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yosi, hey, can you help load me up? Mitzvahs prika. Now, this wasn't an animal himself, but it's also mitzvahs prika there. Now, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yosi was an old man. He didn't want to work to load him up, but he didn't want to lose this mitzvah or ignore it. So I asked him, how much is this bundle of wood worth? He said, half a zuz. So Rabbi Shmuel gave him half a zuz. He said, okay, I'm going to buy it from you, and you could drop it and you could leave it here. So he did so, and then Rabbi Shmuel was mafkir. So the person went and he was zeicha in it, and then he said, load me up again. Now it's mine again. Back to the mitzvah. So he gave him another half a zuz, and again he was mafkir, and again he saw that the guy was planning to be zeicha in it again. So he said, I'm mafkir to everybody, but not to you. So Mar asks, is there such a halacha? Is there a concept of hefker? Hefker means ownerless. How could it be ownerless to one person and not ownerless to others? Mar has a Mishnah on that subject. Mishnah says, Beis Shammai says, such a concept exists. You could be mafker something to the poor and not to the rich, and then the poor could have taken and the rich cannot. But Beis Hillel, who we paskin like, says it's not hefker until it's fully hefker for the poor, for the rich, for everybody. You learn that from Shemitah, just like the concept of the Shemitah is that it has to be equally hefker to everyone. This is also equally hefker to everyone. So Gemara says Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi was actually fooling the man. He was mafkir to everyone because that's the halacha, but he was just telling him that it's not hefkir to you because you wanted to have him not be zeicha in it. Now the Gemara asks, by Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi was a zaken lefi chavayde. Why was he obligated to help the man or to buy it off him? Gemara says Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi did lifnim mishur. So then he went beyond the letter of the law. He really was not obligated. Like we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yosef says on the pasuk. V'his harta esam esachukim v'esatayra v'hidato lehem esaderech yelchu bavas amaisa asher ya'asun. So what do all these things mean here in this pasuk? So v'hidato is that this is their life. Teach them a parnasa, teach them rules, teach them laws. Es had Zerach refers to the concepts of Gemilas Chasadim, doing loving and kindness to others. Asher Yelchu Ba is Bikur Chayim, going Yelchu to visit the sick. Asher, that's Asher Yelchu. Va is doing Kvura, helping out with the dead to bury them. Es Hamasa, that refers to judgment, setting up a courts. Asher Yasun, that is to do beyond the letter of the law, to do Lefnim Mishur Sadin. Now, the Gemara asks that a number of the things on this list would seem to be included in Gemilas Chasadim. Like, for example, Bikur Chaylim is a chesed, so why do you need a pasuk for Gemilas Chasadim and a separate one for visiting the sick, or that is checking out what the sick need? Someone says you need it for a Ben Gilai, a person who was born at the same time and has a similar mazel to the sick individual, where we learn that he takes away 1/60th of his illness, and that means he actually gets 1/60th of the illness. You may think he's not required to go and put himself in that risk, but he is required to go. Now, we learned also that is the burial. You have to help with the dead. That's also chesed. So Gemara says that's for a zaken an elderly individual who's not right for him to be shoveling the earth and schlepping. That it teaches that he has this mitzvah as well. This is Asher Yasun as the Fnimim Yishur Sadin, says Rav Yechon in Yerushalayim was only destroyed because they judged the din of the Torah. Somebody asks, din the Torah, should they have done anarchy? What is wrong with doing the din Torah? Somebody says no, it means that they kept to strictly the din Torah and only the din Torah and did not do beyond the letter of the law, Lefnim Yishur Sadin. Okay, now we get to our next Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses how do you know if something is lost or not. The Gemara will have to explain what the Mishnah means. So the Mishnah says, what's a lost object? So if you find a donkey or a cow on the side of the road grazing calmly, it's not lost. The owner left it there. If you find it with its gear turned over in disarray, or if the cow is running between the vineyards, then you can tell that it's lost. The next halach the Mishnah says is if you return it and it escapes again, you have to keep returning it even 4 or 5 times. Like it says, Hashev Teshivim, return, you should return, meaning do it again and again if that's what's required. Now, what do you get as compensation for your time? So you get paid like a worker who's hired to return lost objects. You don't get compensation for what you lost out of your job. So if your job paid $100,000 an hour and it took you an hour to return, you don't get paid $100,000. You get paid how much somebody would be paid to be a lost object returner. Now, what should you do if you don't want to lose that income? So the Mishnah says you could go to a Beis Din when you find it and make a tenai in front of them. I'm only going to return it if I get paid for my full loss. If you do that, then the person will have to pay you. If the Beis Din's not there, then nothing you can do. Don't return it so that you shouldn't lose. The Gemara now asks, what did the Mishnah mean when it said that these are an Aveda? These are the only things that are a lost object. Nothing else is a lost object. What about everything else we've been discussing up till now? The Gemara says, no, what we mean to say is, what is the rule to be able to identify that something's lost? So it has to look like it's in disarray and not like it may have been left there on purpose. Now, the Gemara asks, so you said that if it's grazing nicely on the side of the road, it's not a lost object. Is that forever? Like, at what point do you say it must be a very calm ox or donkey, but no one's bringing it in, so the owner must not know where it is? So the name of Rav says 3 days. If it's there for 3 days, you could assume it belongs to someone more than 3 days. You have to assume it's lost. So the Gemara asks, 1 second, what about night times? If it's left out overnight, it must be lost. So what do you mean 3 days? 3 days includes 3 nights. So Gemara says, no, you saw it in the beginning of the night as it's about to become nightfall. You saw that it's there. You don't know if it was there overnight. You saw it at sunrise. You don't know if it was there overnight. It could be that it just came out at that time. 3 times, you could go with that assumption. More than 3 times, you have to assume that it was out overnight, and therefore it's a lost object. It's a brisa that says, it seems to support this idea. It says if you find a talus or an axe on a wide street, if you find a cow running between the vineyards, it's a lost object. If you find a talus next to a fence, or an axe next to a fence, or a cow grazing nicely between the vineyards, that is not a lost object. 3 days, however, one after the other, that is lost. If you see water flooding and coming on the way, then you should make a fence in front of it and block it. Now on that, the Gemara notes, Rava has said halacha. He said, any lost object is supposed to return. That includes land. If you see that someone lost his land's being destroyed, or he doesn't know where it is, there's a mitzvah of Shabbat Zveda to return his land to him. Even though land can't move, so it can't actually get lost. But if someone is disconnected from his karka, return it to him. So of Chananya to Rava, bring a proof from this brisa. The brisa said if you see floodwaters coming, you should block it. That's saving someone's land from being destroyed. So Rava said to that, that's not a proof to me, because it could be that we're referring to where there was bundles of grain on the land, and you're not actually saving the land, you're saving the grain. So Mara asks, if so, what's the chiddush? For sure you should. Why would we say not? Mara says the chiddush is that the grain is actually still growing, and it's still not fully developed. It still needs the land. So you may think it's bottled to the land, and just like you don't have a mitzvah to return the land, you don't have a mitzvah to save the grain. Kamash Malan, that you should save it anyway.